The beginning of the summer stage has significantly shook up the Overwatch League. Many teams have faltered, while others have forged their own comeback story. Things are heating up, and just as we conclude the 4th week of qualifiers, we head to a break. And since games won't be resuming until the final week of August, might as well reflect on some new power rankings. These rankings will encompass the entire month of July plus the beginning of August. Usually I focus on global rankings, but leave a place for the regional rank on screen as well. You're also going to see the number that indicates how many places a team has either risen or fallen since my previous rankings in June. A lot has happened, which means that there is a lot to go over with some spicy takes, so hold on boys, it's about to get crazy. But first, we'll get the 19 spot out of the way, as sadly that is still going the way of the Vegas Eternal. Vegas definitely do deserve some credit. They made some quality roster moves and have immediately shown more life than we saw throughout the entirety of the spring. Knife and Irony have looked like rising stars, and Vegas themselves tacked on some extra map wins. They got super close in both the Boston and Valiant games and generally had to be taken a bit more seriously. But the harsh reality is that they're still the worst team because they're winless, and that likely will not change. And outside of the 3 games they were decent in, there were a lot of shortcomings and poor decisions, which goes to show this franchise still has a long way to go. Moving into the 18 spot, we have the Guangzhou Charge, and man, what a fall from grace. The former Kings of the East are now a lifeless shell. They're not even recognizable anymore. This team was the top seed in the spring stage. Now, they're dead last. They threw away Piggy and their star player Choi Se-won, and they ended up dumping their coaching staff. What's left is a pathetic attempt to revive the Chengdu Hunters. This team has no passion, no star players, and they think they can get away with running this wrecking ball Pharah crap. What the Charge have become is extremely sad, and it's one of the craziest and quickest fall-offs in the history of this league. And the truth of the matter is that both their roster and their performance are painfully mediocre. Number 17. The LA Gladiators. It pains me once again to be uttering such words, but let's not kid ourselves. The Glads have fallen apart. A winless stage has taken them from the dark horse competitor of this league to likely to miss the play-ins. A team with Kevster on it is in danger of totally missing out, and sadly, it's all their fault. The Glads just weren't satisfied with their final results in the spring stage. It's understandable to want to take that kind of risk when you know you can be better, but sadly, said changes have severely backfired. The Glads feel super unsure of themselves. It took them weeks to adjust to Marvel's playstyle, and said period absolutely killed their momentum. And with Lastro seemingly MIA, the Glads basically killed their synergy, playmaking, and confidence at the same time. This team looks super uncomfortable outside of Kevster. They can't play Sombra, they can't play Rush, and there's just nothing there. Being reverse swept by both the Valiant and NYXL and losing all of those other games so badly is pathetic. And the consequences for this are potentially being one of the worst teams in the league and likely to miss the playoffs. I'm honestly amazed at this kind of fall off. The Glads were such a fun team, and it's such a shame. Number 16, the LA Valiant. Yeah. We live in a world where the freaking Valiant are out of the bottom 2. I don't know what's more impressive, the fact that some teams have managed to flop harder than them, or that both of their wins managed to come in reverse sweep fashion. It doesn't really feel like they deserve this, but fortunately for them, some teams actually suck more than they do. Regardless, a W is a W, right? This is the best they've played all year. They gave us some great memories and one of the best battles of LA. They still can't play dive to save their lives, but they did manage to surpass their expectations. And hey, that means no second winless season. For all that, I would consider the last couple of weeks to be a booming success. At the 15 slot, I reluctantly put the Seoul Dynasty. Seoul definitely showed some life after making some needed roster changes, plus Prophet carrying his butt off. This team won a lot more games than they lost, and even put up a big upset against the Spark. All things considered, the Dynasty definitely raised their ceiling. However, from a league standard, they still felt about average. The consistency isn't there. One week they beat the Spark. In another, they're losing badly to Shanghai and even losing to O2 Blast. Their performance against OWL teams didn't really leave a lasting impression, and the tough battles with contenders teams doesn't exactly boast confidence. Their big wins came in clutch fashion for sure, but they obviously have a long way to go. I'm pretty hopeful that maybe they can string something together in knockouts, but July and early August weren't super impressive. Number 14. The Shanghai Dragons. Dynasty technically had the higher peak by beating Spark, but Dragons ultimately showed the better consistency. The Dreamers match was like the only real blemish on their performance. The rest was rather consistent, whether it was a win or a loss. They'd beat who they were supposed to, and then they'd proceed to take at least one map off of anybody they lost to. You can tell that something is finally clicking. Viper continues to make a great case for Rookie of the Year, and the tank situation has definitely worked wonders, not only for team cohesion, but also for morale. They're coming into their own, and they're putting up nice fights across the board. It makes you hopeful that maybe a play-in run is actually possible. But here in the present, I don't think they're quite there yet. And since Dragons only beat who they were supposed to, and didn't really do anything else that's noteworthy, they can't go any higher than 14. Number 13. The San Francisco Shock. Once again, a team with proper is finding itself outside the top 10. But the truth is, the Shock pieced together a week and a half worth of decent performances. The rest was either super ugly, really questionable, or just not fun to watch. And while you're happy they won and pretty much locked up a play-in spot, beating a Justice team not at full strength, plus the bottom 3 in the West isn't exactly the greatest resume. Things started off well enough, but teams quickly figured them out. Getting blown out by London and almost losing to Valiant is not the greatest look. They're still adjusting, and they're not too great with the meta. They tried to find their own ways to win, and a lot of the time it just didn't work. The Shock are obviously very talented, and they really might figure something out on the new patch, but going off their performance the last month or so, I'd say that they're kind of mid. And at the 12 spot, I'm going with the London Spitfire. London had quite the glow up. They finally realized that dive comps just were not gonna work, and it ended up being a season-saving decision. A team that looked literally dead in the water just a month ago is now on the precipice of making the play-ins. It is one of the best late-season surges that we have ever seen. London look and feel like a completely different team. They can't play dive to save their lives, and at this point, they don't care. No matter the situation, they're gonna play the Rhine, and there's nothing you can do to stop them. And now, because of this philosophy change, they're on a 4-game winning streak on top of the world. I'm honestly pretty tempted to move them even higher, but in the end, they still do have something to prove. But you can only give so much credit when 3 of your 4 wins came against the Valiant, Vegas, and Gladiators. While I'm definitely interested, I'm not totally sold just yet in terms of their abilities to beat a good team that actually has a solid head on their shoulders. The potential is definitely there. You're a lot more confident in them. They feel more like the fearless Chads that we all remember. But first, they actually have to go out there and prove themselves. If they can do that against a reasonably good team, their rating is gonna go through the roof. At the 11 slot, I'm going with the New York Excelsior. Not so much because they really impressed, but more so because a lot of teams did significantly less. NYXL kinda just stayed afloat. They didn't do any real damage, but they did stay somewhat competitive. NYXL kinda feel like that gatekeeper. They've got a pretty solid team, so if you manage to beat them, chances are that you've got a good shot of making it through play-ins. And to their defense, they definitely feel more orderly with OG's presence. I definitely liked what I saw from the backline. They showed some decent flexibility overall, and they even made the likes of Houston and Florida earn their wins against them. While they didn't do anything overly impressive, they didn't do that much to attract negative attention either. So honestly, smack dab in the middle is a pretty ideal spot. Starting off the top 10 is the Justice. Again, another team that didn't really improve or regress. The Justice had a pretty rough start to the stage. Changing over to Donghoon plus his ping issues caused a couple of mishaps. They lost a couple of games that they probably could have won, but then finally, when Donghoon made it to DC, you could understand why they actually signed this guy. You could feel the camaraderie of the rest of the team finally having their missing guy there. Alpha Yi and Flora continue to be one of the most reliable DPS lines in the league, and Donghoon's flexibility has generally enabled this team better than what FD God could. Their final week of play showed that they are more than capable, when they're at their best, of competing for the top of the middle. They've got it in them to be a pretty special team, and potentially a dark horse, so if I was some of these other teams, I would not be sleeping on the Justice. And at the 9th spot, I have the Vancouver Titans. This is another team where you feel overflowing confidence. Despite the Aspire drama at the beginning of the stage, they pressed forward, and arguably now look better than they ever have before. Heesang ended up being the best thing possible for both himself and the Titans. Him alongside Sugar-Free has proven to be a dangerous combo. While you're not extremely confident they can pull off a lot of major upsets, their consistency is admirable. They genuinely might be the best middle tier team in the West. This roster is incredibly balanced, and everybody feels like a contributor. The Titans have a good chance of finishing above even for the first time since 2019. It's incredible to finally see them escape the pain and the misery that has plagued them for years, and if they keep this up, a playoff berth just might be in their future. Number 8, Toronto Defiant. Canada stonks are actually through the roof right now. Just like their Vancouver counterparts, Toronto feel reborn. They made the changes that were needed in a really bad situation, and the final result has been amazing. Defiant right now feels so much more stable at main support with Opener there, and a rising star in Spectra has made this franchise brim with energy. What they did this stage I actually found quite impressive. For starters, they clutched out some big map 5s against some pretty good teams, which is something they repeatedly failed at one stage prior. And just to sweeten the deal, they've even given some of the top teams in the league a run for their money. When you combine the results with the potential of this new roster, it makes for arguably the best middle tier team out in the West, and with a bit more time, they just might realize their true potential. If the play-in started today, they would absolutely, positively be one of the favorites. Number 7. The Dallas Fuel. Admittedly, I don't love the way that they finished the qualifiers. The Panthera and Spark games were not the best. However, when looking at the big picture, they did well. The dive comp looks a lot improved. You can't argue with being the top seed in the East and also getting a blowout win against Infernal. They've been pretty dominant across the board, and they're comfortably a top 3 team in the East. I kind of feel like that Spark loss is a sign that they'd probably lose to Infernal in a rematch though, which is why I decided to put them at 3rd. But still, they're in an excellent position to be making the playoffs and are one good meta away from potentially taking things to the next level. Dallas fans should feel pretty content with the direction of this team, and it'll be interesting to see how they perform in the knockouts in a couple of weeks. And at the 6th spot is the Hangzhou Spark. I desperately wanted to put them below the Fuel for being way more inconsistent and really just not that impressive. A blunder to the Dynasty, a blowout loss to Infernal, and blowing maps to contenders teams doesn't make you feel all that good. But once again, when it really mattered, when the situation called for it, they played well. The Spark have this tendency to show up right when you start to doubt them. Dallas genuinely felt scared in this match. That reluctance to match the dive mirror was all I needed to see. The Spark are still a very fearsome foe. They come alive under the bright lights, seemingly right when it feels like there's an important must-win game. And despite their weak qualifier, that's basically all I needed to see to convince me that nothing has really changed, hence why I don't really want to move them. However, Seoul Infernal are going to go above them at number 5 and are once again the top dogs of the East. Seoul to me had the best stage of any team there. They were by far the most consistent across all 4 weeks. They drop a map here, They drop a map there, and they had a tough loss to the Dallas Fuel. But mind you, that Dallas game is the only one where anyone came remotely close to overwhelming them. And honestly, even though this just might be copium, I give them a pass for that Dallas game. It was more so their own shortcomings, plus COVID, that truly lost them the match. And I'm willing to bet that they probably win that series 8 times out of 10. And Infernal have been so good otherwise. Zest has genuinely felt unstoppable, and their backline is definitely the strongest of any East team. Maybe I'm just having a lot of cope here, but in my opinion, Infernal have the best possible setup for success there. Their talent, versatility, and consistency could help them be the least affected of any team in the East of a potential meta change or a new patch. Infernal are probably the team with the best chance over there of going on a run come October. And moving on to number 4, I have the Boston Uprising. Ah yes, the gatekeeper of the top 4. And yes, I say that fully knowing they beat the Outlaws, because I think in a rematch you probably wouldn't be that confident that the same result happens. But generally speaking, Boston are pretty strong. There's maybe some discomfort on the somber composition still, but you can't really complain with what you saw. They were one whiffed rampage away from beating the Reign, and taking Florida to a map 5 as well is surefire evidence that they made some big progress. Boston are starting to come into their own. They're flexible, their backline feels more stable, and they honestly might be one good meta shift away from title contention. Boston's in pretty good shape, but since they couldn't capitalize on the Florida and Reign games, and sometimes did show some weakness against some of the weaker opponents out there, they sadly can't go any higher than 4th. There's still a bit of work to do before they truly do reach the pinnacle, but if what they showed us before the break is any kind of indicator, the rest of the league should be feeling very scared. And at number 3, surprise surprise, it's the Atlanta Reign. The mid-season Madness champions and the most dominant team in the league surprisingly took a step back. The Reign got exposed for maybe not being the most flexible group out there. The rise in map-dependent picks and uptick in rush was pretty challenging. They were easily the best dive team beforehand, so things came pretty easy. But clearly, they got a little too comfortable. Houston and Florida managed to expose them with superior flexibility. Hell, even Boston and Toronto gave them some hell with the likes of Junker Queen and Sigma, and there were times where the Reign were visibly frustrated by said results. Change doesn't come very easy for them, and as a result, they no longer are the clear-cut favorites. Flexibility is the name of the game, and the Reign have to play catch-up. This team, though, is still really good, don't get me wrong, they're definitely one of the favorites, but right now they have some serious questions to answer. How do they respond to some potential meta changes, and to other teams finally beating them? The next couple of months are really going to show us what this team is truly made of, and if they really are worthy of hoisting the trophy come October. And coming in at number 2 is the Houston Outlaws. They had just one really bad week, and then they figured things out and looked insanely good. And it came at the perfect time too. After countless attempts, after countless failures, they finally beat the Atlanta Reign. And I don't think people realize just how big this is. The Reign were basically the one and only thing standing in their way. The one obstacle that kept them from being 100% confident. They needed to beat the Reign at some point this year. And without that, they just never would have been able to prove to us or themselves that they're truly worthy of the crown. Now with that out of the way, the world is theirs for the taking. There is not a single team in the league at this point that they can't beat. This team, from top to bottom, is a machine. The flexibility at certain points maybe could be questioned, but for the most part, they're solid. They've shown consistent progress with their rush comps, and Happy continues to become more and more dangerous as the weeks go by. The Outlaws are in amazing shape, and my confidence for them is currently through the roof. If they manage to master whatever the new meta may be, they just might be the favorites to take this thing home. And finally, claiming the number 1 spot for the first time in ATP Power Rankings history is the Florida Mayhem. The Mayhem are the kings of the league. They went through the gauntlet of Houston, Boston, and Atlanta, and came out triumphant. The Mayhem are the most flexible team in the league, and the summer stage allowed for them to use their skill set to its fullest potential. They may not have the recognizable names of other teams out there, but they've got the smarts and the hunger to overcome all of that. The Mayhem sit in excellent shape as we head into the break, and are perhaps the team you feel the most confident in to adjust to a new patch and stay on top. They are very well set up for a title run at this point, and really right now, the only thing that could possibly stand in their way is themselves. At least until the end of this month, with confidence, I can say the Mayhem are the best team in the Overwatch League. As for the future, we shall see. And that, my friends, is my August and July power rankings. Things are pretty chaotic at the bottom, top, and middle at the same time. So many drastic fall-offs and comebacks have made things pretty complicated. The Charge, Gladiators, and Reign took the most notable falls. The Charge and Glads fell 9+ spots each, while the Reign went from the clear-cut number 1 to just barely in the top 3. The teams that benefited the most from this power rankings? The Valiant and Dragons, for other teams simply falling apart, and Defiant, Titans, Dallas, and Florida for making drastic improvements. These power rankings will stand for quite some time before we actually get to see some matches again, and I'm very interested to see how things can change as a new hero gets incorporated. It's crazy to realize that playoffs are just around the corner. Just a couple months to go now, folks. The next time you get a power rankings video, it'll be at the end of the regular season. So how about we slow things down and enjoy what little time we have left? No matter what happens from here, let's just hope for some good Overwatch and some fun storylines. Enjoy it while you can, boys, because soon enough, it's gonna be gone, potentially for good.